How do you do? Storyteller here, and welcome back to the Grey Files, The Man with Two Faces. We are on to Chapter 10, Untangling the Web. Two wide rows of concrete steps lead up to the threshold of the town hall building in downtown Boston, guarded by rows of grand white pillars. The regal building still holds a certain old-world atmosphere about it, causing those who ascend the steps to fall into respectful silence in the shadow of the looming structure. Sebastian lowered his head as he entered swiftly and climbed up the steps toward the massive double doors on the face of the town hall. Apprehensively, the detective pulled open one of the doors and stepped inside, noting the eerie silence within. The somber air of the room weighed heavily, transforming voices into whispers and footsteps into faint taps along the tile floor. Nearly overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere of the stately building, Sebastian crept warily down the hallway as he glanced down at his watch. 11:56 a.m. The live interview and debate scheduled between the two major mayoral candidates with the press was scheduled to begin at 12 o'clock sharp. This would mean that Chandler's office, his temporary office in the town hall, would be empty. With Chandler distracted downtown, Sebastian would be able to search his office, assuming he could get into it, but the detective relied on his own resourcefulness to find a way in. Rounding the corner of the twisting turns in the town hall, he spotted a door along the far wall with the name Chandler painted over the foggy glass. As a detective, Sebastian had always wanted a door painted with his name on it, but working mostly from home made that desire unrealistic. The wary investigator prowled closer to the doorway, taking the crystal knob in hand and gently testing the lock with a slow turn. The knob rolled in his hand and the latch clicked as the door slid open. Sebastian pulled the door open and stepped in quickly to avoid the gaze of anyone passing in the hallway. A woman seated at a desk in the office, a second foggy glass door behind her leading to Chandler's personal office. The woman peered up from a stack of papers curiously, a thin pair of glasses sliding down her nose as she lifted up her head to speak. She seemed impatient for him to speak. Cursing in his mind at her presence, Sebastian cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I'm here for a meeting with Mr. Chandler." Her eyebrow raised further as she stated in a nasally tone, "He stepped out and won't be back until 1:30. Come back then." "Oh, I know that," Sebastian reassured with a charismatic tone, making her squint suspiciously as he continued, "You see, he offered to have me wait for him in his office until he returned." "Why would he do that?" the woman asked in a snotty tone, clearly doubting what he was saying. Sebastian smiled, putting a rolled tape measure and a small sewing kit from his pocket. "To set up my supplies before he gets back. I'm his tailor from New York. Mr. Chandler asked me to secure the stitching on his jacket. We must have him looking his best for the press interviews, right?" The woman lowered her eyes to the desk, furrowing her brow in thought. "I do remember him telling me about his tailor from New York, and if you did come all the way from New York—" She nodded reassuringly to herself, standing up from the desk and turning to the door behind her. Pulling a key from her pocket, she unlocked the door and pushed it open, waving her hand as she instructed, "Go ahead in. I guess he won't mind if you set up your things. Just don't touch anything, okay?" Sebastian grinned as he lifted his right hand up and nodded, "On my word as a tailor." Seemingly content with his statement, she sat down at her desk once more, continuing to reading the papers. Her hand hovered along the words as she read, mouthing the letters. Stepping through the doorway, he slid the foggy glass door closed behind him, and breathed in a sigh of relief, slipping the sewing kit back into his pocket where the receipt for the items crumpled loudly under the weight. Turning to face the office, he saw that it was a simple setup. A bookshelf on the left-hand wall, a desk in the center of the far wall, with 2 large windows on the same wall, and a table on the right-hand side of the room with a coffee maker, mugs, and 2 simple wooden chairs on either side. Atop Chandler's desk were strewn papers, coffee cups, pens, and crumpled notes. The arrangement seemed pretty disorganized for such an important figure. Sebastian stepped around to the other side of the desk, glancing over the papers for anything of interest. Offer letters, reports, and legal documents littered the desktop in a dizzying array. His eyes roamed over each one before a particular letter caught his eye. He could only read the corner header of the paper since other papers were piled on top of it. Hospital report. The sound of voices on the other side of the door broke Sebastian out of his concentration, taking a moment to remember where the letter was on the desk exactly before ducking down to crouch in the chair cave beneath the desk, moments before the door clicked open. "I wasn't planning on meeting with my tailor, Susan. I don't know who—" He paused in the doorway, glancing around before asking, "I thought you said he was waiting in my office," the confused politician asked. The woman's voice called from the office. "He is." Wade shook his head. "Have you been drinking on the job again? There's no one in here." She joined him at the doorway, looking with confusion as she stammered, But I just—" He scoffed, shutting the door in her face. "I don't have time for this." Chandler's footsteps crossed the room toward the desk, walking around to the other side where Sebastian huddled further into the cave. The man's dress shoes stopped just in front of where Sebastian was hiding, lingering there as if towering above him. The side drawer of the desk slid open, and Wade removed something, fiddled with it in his hand, and muttered, "She couldn't even pack up my papers for me. Unbelievable," as he placed the object back into the drawer, sliding it closed before scooping up the papers on the desk and shuffling them, tucking them under his arm before trudging back to the door and slamming it, his muffled voice scolding the receptionist once more before he left. Sebastian crawled out from beneath the desk, feeling his legs shaking as he pulled himself up. The desktop was now cleared and the papers were gone. He never had a chance to read the hospital report that he had spotted, but was curious what Chandler had been tinkering with in the desk drawer. Sliding open the right-hand drawer, a small bottle rolled on its side toward him. Picking up the bottle, he saw that it had a dispenser on the top like lotion, but the liquid inside was a light tan color like his skin tone. Holding it closer, he tried to read the smeared label. Corrective Concealer, Porcelain Foundation, Complete Coverage. Is this makeup? The detective asked himself out loud. Pressing the small pump on the lid, a stream of tan cream poured onto his hand. Rolling up the sleeve of his black polo shirt, he exposed the thin ink lines of an intricate rose tattoo on his shoulder. The bold red of the rose had slightly faded with time, but still contrasted to the green and yellow leaves embracing the tender flower on the curling brown vine it blossomed from. Rolling up the sleeve fully to expose his tattoo, he carefully spread the concealer cream across the dark lines imprinted in his pale skin. Instantly, the beige cream blended and covered the ink, seemingly erasing the tattoo from his skin. "It covers tattoos," Sebastian excitedly whispers, feeling his heart race as he let the sleeve drape down across his bicep. As he was putting together the thoughts in his mind, a small blink of light caught his eye from across the room. A red dot glowed from the corner of the ceiling above the coffee table, and Sebastian felt his stomach drop as a wave of nausea washed over him as he stared into the lens of a security camera. A swear fell from his mouth as he felt panic rising within him, realizing he had to get out of there quickly. From a taxicab down in the street in front of the building, Wade clutched his smartphone tightly in his hand as he gazed down at the screen. The live footage played as he stared back into the eyes of the mysterious man snooping around his office. Chandler grimaced as he shouted to the driver of the cab, "Forget the interview. Take me to 17 Union Street." End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Lucy. Excuse me, I need a drink. A knock at the door of her apartment had awakened Lucy from her afternoon nap. Groggily passing through the kitchen of her apartment, she saw that the clock on the stovetop read 12:17. Wrapping her draping red oversized bathrobe around herself and tying the knot at her waist, she tread across the cold kitchen tile. Her bare feet patted softly on the smooth floor as she reached the door, unlatching the chain and unbolting the lock as she hesitantly pulled it open and peered out into the hall. She was confused to see Wade on the other side of the door, who was supposed to be at his press interview. He stepped in abruptly, grasping her sturdily by the arm in his honeyed voice as he smoothly commanded, "Come, Lucy, we're going for a drive." His eyes drilled into hers with an intensity that warned her to dare not refuse. Silently, she wrapped her bathrobe tighter around herself as he led her out into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind her as she still clung to his arm. The elevator ride was eerily silent as he gazed straight ahead into the closed doors. Down the elevator and out into the street, neither one of them spoke a word, Wade's eyes trained on the taxi still waiting in front of the building. Her pulse was rushing, and she could tell that he was angry, but not just angry. He was scared. Scared of something. He was running, terrified of being caught. "Get in," he barked, opening the door of the cab and dragging her toward it. She spoke for the first time, asking, "Where are we going?" He didn't answer her. He owed her no explanation. She scooted across the back seat as he ducked into the cab, calling up to the driver, "Start driving. The address I told you before." The driver nodded, keeping his eyes low as the car rumbled to a start and pulled into traffic. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself, steadying her heart rate as she felt Wade's eyes burning into her. He shifted closer to her, his body heat radiating off of his skin as he demanded in a whispered tone, "Tell me what you've done." She glanced up at him with innocent eyes, shaking her head in denial as she answered, "I haven't done anything, I promise." His nostrils flared a little, a fire blazing in the depths of his eyes as he pressed against her, forcing her against the door of the car. "Don't lie to me, Lucy." She insisted, "I'm not. Wait, I'm not." "Who is he?" the politician growled. "Tell me who he is." "Who?" she asked, feigning ignorance while wiggling closer to the door of the car, crushed between it and his body weight as the hand gripped forcefully into her thigh. "You know who I mean," he said calmly, letting his presence envelop her. "Tell me what you told him. Why is he following me?" he demanded as he reached to grip her chin, forcing her to stare into his eyes. She fought back tears as she shook her head, continuing to deny everything as she tried to look anywhere but into those dangerous eyes. The cab pulled to a stop, causing Wade to loosen his grip on her chin as he sat up to speak to the driver. Lucy caught her breath, huddling into the corner of the cab as she clung to her bathrobe and tried to hold back her tears. Wade handed a few bills through the mesh screen to the driver, muttering a thanks as he popped open the door, dragging Lucy out by her arm. The first thing she noticed was the cool wind that gusted through her long, matted hair. Lucy turned to face the breeze, staring out of the horizon of rippling blue. "The harbor. Why are we here?" she asked, wiping the sea spray from her cheek. Wade's short brown hair, usually brushed perfectly and styled, gusted back from his face in a wild mane as his steely eyes focused on her. Her blood chilled under the stare of that razor gaze as he kept his grip firm around her arm, urging her onward toward the docks with a slight push. She stumbled forward, her bare feet crossing the grass between the road and the long winding wooden piers of the water. The grass was still wet with the morning dew, making her steps struggle as she slipped across the muddy ground, held up only by his tightening grip. When her feet were firmly planted on the wooden docks, he steered her path along the long stretch of pier, where several small boats were anchored. "Isn't that your boat on the end?" she nervously asked, pointing to the line of boats as they rocked softly over the passing waves. He gave a single nod in response, pushing her along toward them with his jaw tensed. She allowed him to guide her toward the end of the dock where a sleek motorboat swayed on the surface. It was painted white with red stripes that glistened in the afternoon sun. "Where are we going?" Lucy demanded, beginning to struggle as he led her to the edge of the boat, urging her to step across onto it. He didn't answer her, pushing more aggressively on her arm as he forced her onto the swaying deck. She staggered forward, stumbling onto her hands and knees on the damp deck of the boat, crawling forward and huddling against the far edge. Unbothered, Wade stepped over her and knelt beside a small metal fixture tied with a rope. He began pulling on the other end submerged in the water, apparently raising the anchor. Lucy watched as the corroded anchor appeared from the murky water below, still dripping as Wade set it atop the pile of rope. He strode silently to where a steering wheel jutted out from a dashboard in the front of the boat, protected from sea spray by a high pane of curved glass. Pulling a jingling key ring from his pocket, he sorted through them until he found one that he pushed into the ignition slot and turned. The water churned in the back of the boat as the motor roared to life. Wade glanced back at Lucy as he spun the wheel, guiding the boat away from the dock out into open water. She was still huddled against the far side of the boat. Her knees clutched to her chest as she stared at nothing in particular. She lost track of time, hypnotized by the rumble of the engine. The dock slowly disappeared from view, nothing but churning blue waves surrounding them in all directions. He pulled back on the accelerator, slowing their speed until the boat bobbed over the water steadily before shutting off the motor. With a sigh, Wade let go of the wheel, looking over his shoulder to see that Lucy was gazing up at him from where she was huddled on the ground. "Where are we?" she squeaked, unable to see over the edge of the boat from where she sat. He eased down onto the deck of the rocking boat across from her, Lucy's bare feet nervously fidgeting together in front of him. He smiled faintly, though not enough for her to see, reaching tenderly out to run his fingers down her leg, massaging her calf as he felt her body relax slightly. His fingers rubbed firmly into the tense muscle, grazing down slowly toward the ankle. His warm grip wrapped around her slender ankle before his grip tightened suddenly and his other hand reached for the rope piled behind his back. Realizing her predicament, Lucy struggled to pull her leg away, but his iron grip clung onto the tender flesh like talons. He thrashed the rough length of rope around her ankle, wrapping it again and again as he fought off her scratches and punches, slamming her with his shoulder into the metal rim of the boat. The metal rang as her skull thudded against it. She hissed in pain as she felt her joints pop, her muscles flexing as she writhed to break free, clawing at him through the grog of her pulsing head injury as he tied the rope in knots around her ankle. The anchor at the far end of the rope, a 30-pound ball of lead, dragged closer with each loop that he wound around her ankle. When the rope was tied in knots, he gripped her arms, holding them down as he growled, "I should have never trusted you." She sobbed, shrieking the words, "I never told anyone, I promise I didn't." He brutally shook her shoulders, his rough voice booming, "Stop lying to me." Wade dragged her up from where she was huddled, listening to her pleas through her sobbing as she clung to his arms. He pressed her against the railing, holding her there with one arm as he leaned down to pick up the anchor with the other. As he leaned, she kicked at his face, her knee connecting with his jaw as he stumbled backwards. But even free from his grip, the rope weighing down her ankle kept her from fleeing, instead toppling to the ground while trying to drag herself toward where the keys were dangling from the ignition. But she struggled in vain as he yanked on the anchor, dragging her back by the leg, still ensnared. Reclaiming her struggling arms, which shook with her visible terror, he dragged her up once more. Balancing her body over the railing, he began nudging the anchor closer with his foot. It scraped closer across the scuffed deck, resting between their feet. He leaned to pick it up, guarding against her kicks while still holding her as she tried to struggle, despite the throbbing in her head. Thrashing, Lucy begged for him to listen, for him to believe that she would never betray him, but he saw through her lies, knowing she had sought the help of the man now invading his privacy and digging up his past. He didn't know who this man was, but Wade knew that he had to stop him from digging any deeper. This mysterious interferer would be dealt with, but not before he took care of another problem. This wretched woman, who had betrayed him, would know the price for breaking his trust. He grimaced at her. "I took you out of that nightclub you worked in, and got you away from those pigs who bargained for your body. I gave you a home, a life with me, and the respect of the public, but you would throw that away," he spit spitefully. "You'd betray me. And for what?" Tears streaked down her cheeks as her jaw stammered, her words now beyond incoherent. He shook his head. "I gave you everything you could ever want, but you just couldn't keep your filthy mouth shut. And now?" His eyes lowered for a moment, and she watched the darkness washing over them, his breaths coming in rasps, the veins bulging in his temples as his pulse beat so strongly she could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. Wade snarled, his nails burrowing into her delicate skin as he whispered, "Now I have to kill you." With a violent shove, he let go of the anchor, and she went tumbling over the railing. Her hands groped out wildly as she fell over the side. Her body hit the water with a deafening splash, slipping below the waves quickly under the weight of the anchor. The water churned with her panicked flailing, bubbles rising as he heard her muffled screams. He stared down into the swirling water as she sank further out of view, the anchor dragging her deeper and deeper. He watched as the bubbles slowly stopped, and the water returned to smoothly rippling. When the surface of the water smoothed, Wade realized he was gazing back into his own reflection, and for that brief moment, he didn't recognize the face staring back at him. End of Chapter 11. I think we're going to limit this to 2 chapters for this episode, since we're already almost at 15 minutes. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!